Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters with me, Dr Audrey Tang. This is our office hours show and we talk about all things workplace well-being, and our topic today is workplace bullying. This happens more than we think, and we have got some great experts to talk about this, and we've even heard from you to talk about your stories. But before we go over to the main studio, we're going to hand over to Dr Meg Arroll to talk about microaggressions in the workplace.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit about bullying at work, and one of my specialist areas is everyday trauma. Now, when we talk about everyday low-grade trauma, we often use the term little t, which is lowercase t, or tiny traumas. And this does not mean that the impact isn't significant and major in many cases, but it is because this everyday type of trauma, well, these types of occurrences, they can be quite insidious. They can seem like they're not a big deal if they are one-offs, as it were, but actually this daily grind of trauma does weigh us down. So how does this function at work in particular? Well, we know quite a lot about microaggressions, and I became quite interested in microaggressions because of the links with lowercase t, tiny traumas, as it were. So these are things at work which we tend to kind of dismiss, and we think, well, it's not that big of a deal, but actually they make us feel oftentimes quite bad about ourselves or just confused. And over time, what we know from research is that microaggressions as a form of cumulative trauma, they can impact our mental and physical health quite substantially. So some examples of microaggressions at work could be having a colleague who interrupts you in almost every meeting, gives those kind of backhanded compliments like, oh, didn't you do well considering your background? These statements really do undermine us, and the interruptions, they make us feel less than. And what happens is we have lower levels of confidence. It can increase levels of anxiety and sometimes lead to depression and low mood. So they're not to be ignored and dismissed. Now, I had one client I was working with, and my goodness, she was just absolutely amazing at her job. She was in a very high pressured industry, and what happened over time was that her confidence was eroded from her line manager just subtly putting her down in a very misogynistic way. So in one of her performance reviews, he basically said, well, you're very headmistress-like. And she didn't know how to respond to that. And she walked away thinking, well, what exactly does that mean? And that in itself was a microaggression. But over the course of 8 years, hearing these sorts of comments, being interrupted in meetings or cut off when she was talking, well, it did lead to a very high level of anxiety. She wasn't sleeping particularly well. She was over preparing for meetings because she felt like she was going to be attacked. Or actually, to be honest, she didn't know why she was doing that. That was a fear response that had been activated within her because of 8 years of microaggressions. So oftentimes tiny trauma, lowercase t trauma, what happens is that because it does take repeated and cumulative occurrences that are quite, what does I say, they're insidious, they're low grade, they could easily be dismissed, is we start to have these challenging feelings, we alter our behavior, but we're just not even sure why. So in our work together, we unravel some of this. And in my work, I use this AAA model, which is awareness, acceptance, and action. And that awareness piece was so important because what we were able to do is we were able to separate the individual characteristics of my client. So her characteristics were that she was very conscientious. She was actually very, very good at her job, particularly her soft skills within this quite demanding environment. And what were some of the characteristics of the culture of this organization? And this was important because she had begun to blame herself for basically not being good enough and not being up to the task of her job, which she clearly was. So then the question is, how can we deal with microaggressions at work in a professional manner that also helps to bolster our confidence rather than undermine it? Well, one way is to separate the intent from the statement. So for example, if someone, a colleague, or even a line manager has said to us, "Oh, well, haven't you done well?" particularly considering your background. But you can stop for a moment and pause, ground yourself, and say, "Thank you for the compliment. I think that was a compliment, but actually by you saying due to your background, what you've done there is you've undermined that compliment." And pause with the individual and just ask them to consider that. Also, you can use clarification and say, "Well, okay, what exactly did you mean by that? What did you mean by, especially because of your background?" Now that then asks the other individual to really consider what they meant by that statement. I also have some other techniques that you can look at in my book, Tiny Traumas. And these are really to help us to combat the cumulative weight of lower grade trauma that does impact us. And you don't have to be subject to daily, weekly, monthly, constant microaggressions at work. And there is one last point that I want to make about microaggressions and bullying, whether that be quite overt bullying or this sort of more sneaky, sly type bullying that actually people may not even know that they're engaged in. And that is, I was really fascinated that there seemed to be a higher proportion of women and people from marginalized groups who reported some of the symptoms and signs of imposter syndrome. Now, it didn't make any sense to me. Why would these groups feel like imposters more so than other groups? There didn't seem to be any sort of really obvious reason, as it were. But more research has shown that people from marginalized groups and women experience microaggressions much more frequently at work, and actually this type of constant undermining of our confidence, of our skills, of our knowledge in the workplace, that can lead us to feeling like an imposter and that we might be found out, as it were. So it's incredibly important for us as individuals to really stand up and combat microaggressions, but also to make our organizations aware of the impact of this type of interaction and that it doesn't really serve any of us at all. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Well, thank you, Meg. That's on microaggressions in the workplace. And welcome to Anita Powell. We're welcoming one of our favourite guests back. And of course, you know Judith. Today's topic is bullying in the workplace. And we're going to start off by giving some of your experiences that you've given to us. The first couple I've just got from one person said that they were bullied at work for 2 years and then just had to leave. They felt they couldn't do anything and just went. And then another one actually really wanted to share, but was still so raw from it that they just couldn't. Oh, wow. And I think that's heartbreaking, because really work is a place where you should be able to get support and encouragement and achieve. And then I know, Jude, you've got some, and Anita and I will have a listen to what people have to say.
So I my other work is in a completely different sector, and it's quite rife with bullying and harassment, and there are many. I'm a clerk in local government, and there are many clerks as well. I'd say the majority are female, and I don't know, it'd be quite interesting to get your take on whether it's sort of directed at females. But this is just one example. So if someone's the clerk of a parish or town council, they're the proper officer. So they, you know, their status is of somebody who runs the business of that council. So this one clerk says that she is always being told, you're only the clerk, you shouldn't talk in meetings, your opinions don't matter. They talk over her, they don't let her speak, they interrupt her all the time. And this is when she's giving legal advice that they need to hear before they make their decisions, and they just reject her advice and do what they want anyway. And she ends up with, and I have just resigned because of it. So it's just really sad because she really loves her job. That's one example.
Take that for a minute, because you work in the community, you're the founder of Menopause Alliance. What's your take on that? I mean, I always find it horrible when people just have to resign because there's nothing else they can do, but is this a common occurrence?
I don't necessarily know it's a common occurrence. I do know certain areas of work have high levels of it. And I think sometimes you expect that element of aggression in certain aspects of corporate. Where you deal with a lot of money and you're competing with your peers, and your job literally is highly stressed. If you don't earn a certain amount of money, you're gone. But I'm shocked by, within the community and third sector, that also happens.
Yes.
And I've put it down to the fact that a lot of people volunteer their time into the third sector, community sector, who come from corporate. And they're not there because of the income, they're there because they want control. So what happens if they bring that professional mindset they had in corporate into a community sector, and they presume everyone around them is less than them because they haven't come from a position of corporate or power, and therefore they treat people as if they should work for them. Or I remember once I worked with someone who volunteered for a community organisation I worked for, and he kept telling everyone he used to be a barrister. Everyone. I was thinking, well, I don't care what you used to be. And I didn't understand why he had to keep telling me. And then I turned to somebody else, and I was his senior. Yeah, I turned to somebody else and said, if he keeps telling me that, I'm going to ask for his qualifications. Because I want, if you keep telling me you're a barrister because you're telling me to shut up, or you're telling me, oh, I used to work for the BBC, because it's a media organisation, it's a media voluntary sector, and I think, well, where's your qualifications? I want to see your CV. You keep throwing it in my face in a way of saying, shut up. Because I'm your senior, and you're not responding to my seniority. And I wasn't allowed to do that because my other colleagues said, no, that will upset them.
Oh my gosh, that will upset them.
Yes, and there was a man, there were two men.
So it's all right for him to upset you?
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Yeah.
No wonder people feel no other option but to leave sometimes, because they feel their hands are tied. They've spoken up, you've spoken to a colleague, and then you've kind of immediately been knocked back down and told, well, actually, no, it'll upset the other person.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! This is opening a big discussion here. Right, let's go to your next story.
Okay, so I have a lot more that are along the same lines. So this one, somebody's written to me. I've been working in local government since 2005, and I'm also a trainer in the Code of Conduct for councillors. At this stage of my career, I'm now forced to locum, as having experienced 2 extreme cases of bullying and harassment at town councils, I can no longer take the risk to my mental health should this pattern continue. This way, I can choose to leave and move on if the behaviour of councillors is poor. I hear continually of bullying and harassment being suffered by town and parish clerks in a far too regular basis. I believe it's unfair to have councillors with no previous HR experience sitting on committees, especially staffing committees, and not prepared to take the relevant training to enable them to fulfil this important role. There is little support offered to clerks who often work alone and their mental health suffers to a severe degree. I am aware of countless town and parish councils having come to a financial settlement in favour of the clerk, having strong cases for an employment tribunal.
Wow.
And there's many examples of that. This is shocking and a total misuse of public funds. And then, this is a slightly political point. When will England have the same options as Wales to bring counsellors to task over their abhorrent behaviour towards clerks? So Wales are much better at dealing with this. They have somewhere to go, whereas in it we don't. When will it become mandatory for counsellors to undergo training? The time for change is long overdue to ensure clerks are able to fulfil their role without being subjected to this abuse regularly.
That's really interesting, because I think sometimes one of the problems with the third sector, community sector, is there are fewer places where you can go. In corporate, at least there is an HR or maybe an ombudsman if there's no resolution.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a bit self-regulatory.
Very self-regulatory.
And that means people can get away with a lot of stuff.
Yes. I mean, in local government, so each council will have a staffing committee, hopefully. But so the councillors, it like you say, it's self-regulatory. It's very local. There isn't anywhere else to go. It's a very difficult position.
In that, I mean, I think your point that you made, Anita, about people going into third sector, being corporate, almost wanting just to replay their corporate role in... Should people be regulated first before they go into the sector? You know, as in, just check you're the right person for this sector, not your qualifications.
Can I just clarify, the councillors you're talking about, are they elected by the general public? Or are they elected by the borough? How did they get the job?
So there are parish and town council elections.
Yeah.
So some will be elected, but the elections process is very interesting, because if you stand for election, say there are 8 seats on a council and 8 people stand, it's an uncontested election, so there's no votes. They're just automatically. So they're called elected councillors, but not necessarily. But then between the elections, if people leave, then other councillors can be co-opted on. So quite often it will be friends of existing councillors.
Okay then. Okay, so really, the general public don't even get involved with picking.
Rarely.
It
happens rarely. More so on town councils.
Okay.
But parish councils, if it's an uncontested election, they're elected automatically.
Okay. I mean, I have done some work with regards to elected councillors in the area I live in and stuff like that. So I'm kind of passionate about supporting, and I've seen enough to totally understand where you're coming from with regards to the power control. Can I ask, are the clerks mainly female?
Mainly. Interestingly enough, there are male clerks. There's quite a few, and it does happen to them as well, but not in the same way.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I would say, from what I've seen and what I've heard, people have, directed this purely for this show. And the females generally get called names or put down, and the male clerks get challenged in different ways. So it's a different kind of harassment or bullying, whichever form it takes.
I mean, I do think that the system needs to change, but also what screaming in my head, if this is how they treat people who work for them, how do they treat the wider community? How do they conduct their business? How authentic, how honest, how caring are they to the community that they serve? If this is how they treat their support staff, and I suspect that they don't treat the general public very nicely, or some of them. Yeah. I
mean, there's lots of stories I could tell. I won't go into now, but yeah, you raise a very good point.
That's really important, and actually, it sort of goes to one of our first discussion questions. Is so many people, or maybe their colleagues and friends, might say, "Oh, but it's just banter. It's fun." When does banter really not become banter, and it is a microaggression?
I mean, for me, in a workspace, it's never banter. If it's not to do with your actual structure of your job, and you haven't formed a relationship where it's actually a personal relationship, it's never banter. You know, because you don't know me, you don't know my boundary lines. We have a professional relationship. I can't go and cut your hair off as a joke. You know, I can't go and you know, take your jacket and flush it down the toilet. I can call that banter if I want to, because that's what I do with my friends. Well, it's actually not what I do with my friends, but I can say that because, you know, I'm a good laugh. That's what we do when we go out on a Saturday night. But that's not acceptable. So you meet me in the workspace, all because you use certain type of language, you're sexist, you might make racist jokes, you might make jokes about certain communities and presume that I should find it funny. No, that's unacceptable.
That's a really good point, that professional work is professional work and it should be maintained regardless, because I guess anything that is banter is between people who've become friends. So therefore, if you're using it as an excuse, you shouldn't have done it in the first place.
Yeah.
That's really, I never thought of it in that way, actually, because you're so often told, oh, you're too sensitive, it was just fun. But you're right. You didn't know me well enough to know I would be sensitive.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have done it.
Exactly.
Yes. What else have we got, Jude?
So these are examples of emails that have been sent to clerks. This is an email that was sent from a counsellor to another counsellor talking about a clerk, where he said, he's complaining about the clerk, and then he ends, well, this didn't happen, and therefore she's a liar. And then the other counsellor says, I think you should apologise. And then he says, he sends an apology because he accidentally copied the clerk in.
Yeah.
So he sends the clerk an apology. This is nothing like I would normally behave. I'm very, very sorry. In fact, he's behaved like this for 5 years.
Yeah.
And then he sends another email to the other counsellor, still copying the clerk in, saying, I've apologised, but I didn't mean a word of it. So that's just a really small example. I know, it's hilarious. And the clerk has to take it as that, because actually this happens all of the time.
That is, yeah.
And but it is funny.
But it's not when you think
about it. But it's a crazy situation. So that's just one example. But the fact that he called her a liar is defamatory, you know, and as it happened, the clerk hadn't lied at all, and never does, never would. So that's just one example.
So with something like that, though,
yes.
and you're accidentally copied into that.
Yes.
I know I immediately find it laughable, but it's not laughable.
It is in
affects
a way,
us, doesn't it? It will affect us mentally, because now we're actually questioning: am I a liar? I don't know. I mean, or is that me being too sensitive? What are your thoughts, Anita?
I think as women, we're told to tolerate, and because I mean, even though I know the male scenario is different, and I can't speak on behalf as a man. I mean, I can try and understand, but I think the communication between men is different. I mean, I don't really understand how sometimes men can literally fall out. They could go out on Saturday night and end up punching each other, and then 2 days later they're out for a drink saying, oh, we're just good mates. Women will never do that.
No.
We just would never do that. So men, this is my response as a woman, and I understand women a lot better. I just find that as women we're told to tolerate inappropriate behaviour, and that includes in the workplace. And even though we have positions of power, you know, we intellectually are equal to men, we are told that we're sometimes treated as if we're just furniture. So we're there to kind of prop them up, and we're not allowed to have opinions. We're just there for them to support. That's it. So we're not supposed to question them. We're not supposed to have an opinion. We're definitely not supposed to disagree with them. And I find for me personally that I'm 50 odd. I don't care. So I really some parts of I can't work in, because I do tell people no. And I've got a friend, and we were joking over I went to a council meeting and I asked a question in relation to where I live, and a councillor said, gave an answer, and in a room full of all the councillors in the whole of Bedford Borough Council, I said, I do not like your answer. Yeah. And then he responded, well, I'm sorry you don't like your answer. And I said, well, your answer is not acceptable. Yeah. And then it's like everyone remembers, everyone in the room was shocked because it's a senior councillor for the whole of Bedford. And now my friend wants to get a T-shirt made up saying, I do not like your answer.
I think, though, the thing is, whilst I know we almost find ways of dealing with this kind of constant microaggression aimed at us, you make such an important point, because actually, if people won't accept constructive criticism, if people won't accept devil's advocate, if people won't accept, okay, could you explain that a little bit more? How can you even know that your decisions are going to be helpful if we're talking about senior councils anyway? It's bad practice, generally, not to listen to other people, especially when it comes from your constituents or comes from a senior or a colleague.
Exactly.
We shall be back. Let you think about that. So if you've got any comments about your own experiences, please add them to the comments, and we'll be back just after this. We are talking about bullying in the workplace. We've been hearing stories from you. You've written in and you've told us about your experiences. They've been horrible experiences. We are trying to understand them. We're trying to unpack them. We will get onto maybe some things that you can do to help yourself as well. Judith, what else have we got?
So I have another email. This is from another counsellor to another clerk who is most polite and has the most integrity, you could kind of imagine, very professional, and needed to give some legal advice, which the counsellors did not like, and then one of them followed up with an email. I considered your attitude rude, vindictive and totally childish in the extreme. Not only your dictatorial attitude, but the subsequent actions you took upon yourself to ensure the support of the governing body auditor to protect your views. Now, what he meant by that was that it was backed up with law, so he didn't like it. And then went on to say, when the clerk replied, this is just the law that backs up what I've said. He said, you don't give up, do you? Just grow up and try to be an adult. So this is a clerk who received daily emails like this, from this counsellor and others.
That's so patronising.
It's patronising, but it's also incorrect, based on their own kind of anger rather than, the clerk's just doing her job. That
comes back to what Anita was saying before the break. If people are giving you an answer and someone dares to say that is unacceptable for these reasons, to just bite back and just double down on bad behaviour, that's outrageous. And what worries me in these examples is this one is an email chain where other people are copied in.
Yes.
In a council meeting, there's got to be other people there. What is everyone else doing? Is everyone else just going, okay, that's nothing to do with me?
Pretty much from what I've been told and what I've experienced myself.
How does that...
Yeah.
I mean, do you know anything about the person who sent it? Are they from corporate space? Are they from? Did they have a job of power? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the thing is are they paid to be a parish counsellor?
No, it's an unpaid professional role.
So it fits in with what I know.
Yes.
Where people come from corporate, where they behave like that all day long, and even though they've retired, they miss the power.
Yes.
And they miss their control.
Yes.
So they volunteer for these positions of power just to control. They actually don't care about improving the quality of lives of the community that they live in, because they don't even care about the mental health of their clerk. They don't even care about their colleague. So they definitely don't care about anyone else.
That's a good point.
That's the most important point to take from this, because we are talking third sector, we're talking community here.
Yes.
We're not even talking organisations.
Yeah.
We're talking about people who are trying to do the best thing with the tiny budget to support people, support us day to day. We're not even looking at your big,
corporate. So essentially, if people's motivation to be in a position like that isn't to help the community, which is what you might think that they go into that role for, but to feed their own sense of ego, then no wonder there's behaviour and bullying like this.
So when you're struggling in the workplace, how does that impact other areas of your life? I can imagine if I got an email like that, I'd be stewing about it. And I'd be stewing about it for days. And then I wouldn't be able to engage properly anywhere else. Yeah. What have you seen, or maybe what have you experienced?
I mean, some people may possibly say that my response to that situation, because I've been in that situation before, might not necessarily be the best, but it's the best for me. If I'm not happy in the workplace and I'm treated a certain way, I express myself. And if I'm still not happy, I leave. Even though economically I may suffer, and I have done that. I have done that before. I have whistleblowed an employer, and it's had a terrible effect on me, because then my ex-employer then started to vandalise my car, and I had to report them 4 times to the police.
Oh my goodness!
Oh my God!
And it's all third sector.
Oh my God!
So, and I would not back down. This is the thing, I wouldn't back down. The more you went for me, the more I whistleblowed.
Oh my God.
That's really shocking.
I'm reeling from the back, because I reiterate, third sector is helping other people. Like you and me. We're talking about this. We're not talking about people who've got loads and loads of cash. I mean, but on that, why do we prefer to leave sometimes? Is it, I know I've left because of utter exhaustion with it. I can't be bothered to fight. Is that the reason, or is it just sticking 2 fingers? Why do we leave?
I think for me on a personal level, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. Sometimes it's conflict management. I don't know how to do it. Really so literally you go from being quiet, biting your tongue, to potential explosion. And that's when you walk out. That's when you hand your notice in. And actually, if as a society we develop conflict management, we may still leave, but actually the transition from, look, I'm not happy, let's talk through this, we should be able to instigate that. It could be that they don't respond, but it doesn't mean you give up. And I've realised with me, I might try a little bit, because the scenario I told you about, sometimes my ex-employer had a go at me for things which had nothing to do with me. And my response was, but it's not my fault. And he said, well, no, this, I said, you're blowing up because it's gone wrong. You're not blowing up at me because I did it. And if I did it, I'll put my hands up and say, I've done it. I'm not that precious with regards to things. If I've done something wrong, I will admit it. But you're blowing up at me. And I said, you need to stop that. So in a certain way, I did tame him, but he was still corrupt. And
I love that. I love that point about how sometimes, yes, we leave because we don't know in ourselves the other option. We don't always get taught conflict management. We certainly don't get taught this kind of conflict management. And I mean, the sad part is, I've spoken to someone recently where they are being bullied. This is in a more personal context, but their response is they've said to me, well, my default is just to take it. My default position is to just roll over and take it. Are we so conditioned to think our voices are powerless?
I think we live in a society that expects that. We live in a tier society, so you're powerful or you're not powerful. I mean, I don't want to bring up the American elections, but they voted in people who clearly must be harder to work with than the people you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly,
even harder.
A lot harder. And you can actually, if you use them as an example, imagine if they lost all their power and they retired and they became your parish councillor. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Can you imagine what that would be like?
And that probably will happen to some of them as well. They'll go on to, oh dear.
And when you think about them, then you can understand.
Yes.
What you're dealing with.
That's like the extreme example of what's happening. Yeah, That's a really good analogy, isn't it?
It's sinking in, everything you're saying, Anita, and I'm just going, oh my goodness, you're right. It's when someone has missed the power and they're just acting out. And yet, because we're talking third sector and community, you in the community, you feel a bit desperate. You feel, oh, wow, somebody who's got this qualification wants to come and help us. They want to do good because you've gone into it with that intention and you expect other people to have the same intention.
Yeah.
And we need to learn as well. And we need to understand what other people's intentions are. Right, we're going to hold that thought because we are going to go on to all the ways that I know Anita's Menopause Alliance helps people advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves, and other charities do that as well when they are not led by corporate people who want power. So hold those thoughts. We'll be back just after this.
Hey there, I'm Diane Forster, host of I Have Today, where we talk about the art of intentional living. Our show is on the Fresh Takes channel on Mondays at 11 a.m. Pacific. So if you're ready to be inspired, empowered, and educated and learn how to live the I Have Today way, then tune in. Hope to see you there.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours, where we're talking to Anita about bullying in the workplace. So Menopause Alliance, how might that help us? And other groups and charities, how might that help us with bullying in the workplace?
A lot of women who are struggling with menopause and who work, sometimes their menopause symptoms have an impact on their work. And it could be just low motivation. It could be that it's affecting their memory. It could be if you stand up all day, say for instance you work in a supermarket or whatever, or hairdressers, that your joints ache. So therefore standing up all day may affect you. And sometimes what happens is that if you're struggling, the workplace doesn't accommodate the struggle. They see your medical issue as a weakness, and therefore sometimes bullying comes in because you're being told off, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, rather than try to talk to the employee and understand what they're going through, which is very much a natural thing. In a similar way you would do someone going through a pregnancy, or someone who had a disability, or an employee who developed, say for instance, cancer or something like that. You work with that person because you value that human being. That's
the word.
You value that person.
Yes.
So therefore you work together to understand their difficulties and how they can still work for your organisation but work around the difficulties. So it could be you shorten your hours. It could be that maybe you do less standing up. It could be that maybe change your clothing if you sweat a lot. Yeah. It could be more flexible work at home. It could be you start later because you're having problems sleeping, so you can't get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, and you allow them to sleep in, but they finish later. It could be all kinds of things like that. But because there's a lack of understanding about menopause, and also women also struggling about talking about menopause because it contradicts the narrative that women are equal, that don't devalue me because I'm feminine or female. So when it comes to female conditions, some women are reluctant to tell their employer what they're going through, but it's still showing through their work, but they're not explaining it in dialogue.
Yes.
Because they don't want to be stigmatised with, that's why we should employ women.
Yeah. I see. Oh my goodness. But again, I see how your charities can give you that information that you need, as well as help you advocate for yourself in those respects. I think that's so important. I mean, when we've been through this sort of situation, it affects us, and it does affect us emotionally and mentally, whether it is because of menopause, whether it is because of any other behaviours we've had to put up with. How might we start to recover from feeling just always not understood or less than?
I mean, I try and advocate women to develop every day some kind of self-care and self-value, develop self-esteem. I think that's really important. And I think sometimes as well, when you're older, you need to strip away what we've been taught around materialism, about being obsessed with things, and focus on what's within us. what we need. So, it could be extra hours sleep, it could be going for a walk, it could be having a laugh with your friends, it could be all these things actually make you feel better within yourselves, rather than striving for materialism sometimes, because that's when you stay in work. That's when you become, I need to earn this amount of money, so therefore I have to put up with this abuse. And I'm not saying that you should hate money or hate work. I'm saying that sometimes if you build yourself internally, you can handle external. If the cup is empty, you can't, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Hugely.
Yeah. So it's about, it's developing self-esteem, self-value, and I also do believe that you should also work on self-development, but it's not about, it's about you internally. It's not about self-development. I want a bigger house.
Yes.
I think it is about looking in the mirror and loving who you are.
That's beautiful and so important. I mean, do you mind me being cheeky and ask what you do for your well-being? What tip you could give us?
First of all, with me, I just love my children. So for me, just having conversations with them, hugs with them, going out for meals. Like yesterday, I went shopping with my daughter, and that for me is really satisfying.
Nourishing, isn't
it's
it?
nourishing because our relationship is so pure. It's not based on stuff. Does that make sense?
I feel it. I feel the energy. I'm feeling it.
So I like those types of relationships where it's not based on stuff. It's based on innocence and purity and connection.
Yeah.
So for me, spending any time with my children, talking on the phone or anything like that, always makes me feel grounded.
Beautiful.
But also ensuring you get good sleep. Like when I was walking here, I walked along the river. And even though I was slightly late, I did stop and take a photo of because it was beautiful.
Yeah, it really is.
Yes.
It was beautiful. I thought, wow, this is beautiful. But just and then I continued walking and I was late.
That's what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So I stopped for 30 seconds and I appreciated my surroundings.
We all need to do that.
I quite often drive down to the river when I leave here.
Oh.
Yeah. I
Oh,
quite
my
often do
goodness.
that. Just have a look. I
Yeah,
agree with you.
I love.
So, on those lines then, how do you practice better self-acceptance and self-compassion, and how do you role model that to your children?
I think our relationship is one which children do mirror what they
do.
So for me, I don't necessarily have to teach my children. It's just part of our relationship. And I can see that my daughter does some of the things that I do. So we could go for a walk sometimes down the river and my daughter just stops and says, "Oh, Mum, look at the sky," because I do that.
I love that.
So nice.
And my daughter, she loves photography. And she's actually done a degree in filmmaking and photography. Wow. And that's from when we were younger. I said, "Oh, look at that. Let's take out a photo." So she's obviously responded.
Learning from you.
Learning from me. So I think that sometimes children mirror
They do.
your behaviour and things like that, which is good, I feel, if the mirroring's good.
I was going to say, because that takes us back to what we were saying at the start.
Yes.
What are you role modelling if you're behaving badly? Oh, my
Exactly
goodness.
And if somebody is going through a healing process and you're supporting them, where do you start? How do you start to support somebody?
Listen, and also try to minimise self-hate. So if they say, "Oh, I'm doing this," then I say, "No, you're not the problem. You're not the problem at all. This has been put upon you. What have you done wrong?" In the examples you gave, those people made a commitment to help their community.
Yes.
And look how they were treated.
Yeah.
So even though they might develop low self-esteem and question who they are, what have they done? What have they done wrong? They were wronged.
They were the wronged ones.
Yes.
You're right. And sometimes it takes somebody else to make them see that.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you. And what's next for you personally, and where can we find out more about you?
Because we want you on all our committees now.
I'll tell all these clerks they'll want you to go there and sort them all out.
I would as well.
You need to.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just volunteer my time and then I'll just disappear. So really, I just do stuff around Menopause Alliance, and I just do community work and just help people and just take photos of things.
Love it.
You bring so much joyful energy to
Yeah.
our studio.
Totally.
Every time we see you, it's just our pleasure. We are going to go over to Business Boost, but we're keeping Anita for her top tips. We'll be back just after this. In today's Business Boost, I wanted to give you one tiny tip, and this is how you could call out a microaggression very, very subtly. You can simply say to someone, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?" That forces them to think about what they just said and say it again. It may well be they didn't really mean it to come out like that. This gives them an opportunity to either double down, in which case that can open a conversation, or maybe think about it and potentially reframe what they were going to say. And rather than me carry on, what I wanted to do is hand over to one of our resident experts, Dr Gus Chaves. He's a GP and a clinical hypnotherapist, and he is going to give you his tips for speaking to bullies.
We all face moments when someone is disrespectful or difficult to handle. In these stressful situations, how you respond makes all the difference. So what I want to try to talk about today is to stand up for yourself while still remaining compassionate. So the first thing you should do is know that silence is powerful. So hold silence for 10 seconds or more. This gives the other person space to realize the absurdity of their behavior. Often, they'll feel exposed. Then, ask a question. The person who asks the questions controls the conversation. So try something like, "Do you always talk to people this way?" And let them listen to that. Let them realize that you're aware of what they're doing. This flips the focus back on them and disrupts their pattern. Two key things to remember. First, it's not about you. This behavior is a reflection of them, not you. Everyone is going through something. So stand up for yourself always, but also be compassionate. People have their own struggles. Let them be and respect their journey. I hope you never have to deal with a situation like this. But if you do, try this approach and let me know in the comments how it went.
Well, what a show. We've come back to our final part of this show on workplace bad behaviour, including bullying, and we've looked at ways that we can address some of that and looked at ways that we can learn to heal from that. What have you taken, ladies, from today? For me, it was really reflecting on your point that where did people who want to be nasty to others in the third sector, in the community, where have they come from and why have they come from there? And how much have they really committed to serve their community if we experience those bad behaviours? I had not thought of it in that way before, so I'm so grateful to you for really bringing that to the fore. So that's what I'm taking away from that, and I'll question that whenever, if we ever hire.
And I think I think you're absolutely right that you clarified that, you made that really clear. And taking that a bit further as well, it's made me realise that in so many situations where clerks are going to their counsellors, but you just have to do it like this. Please don't do it. Counsellors don't care. They don't care. And so actually it's pointless trying to make them understand or trying to make them kind of conform to the rules and the law, because they're not there for that reason anyway. So what you said has really clarified that. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, what I also love is just the self-compassion and the healing and the internal work, which is so important, that we all have to do, because that may mean we might find a different way of dealing when we're having these accusations and bad behaviours levelled at us. It may mean we just go, like you say, I can't change anything, but I'm not putting myself through this anymore. But you don't leave in anger.
Yes.
You leave in, this is what's right for me, according to my values. Anita, we're going to throw it over to you for your top tips on how we can make our voices heard.
Well, I think it's about listening to yourself I think sometimes, especially I feel as a woman, we're told what we are allowed to say, and we're given parameters and boundaries by others. And I'm fully aware with myself that I'm in certain places branded a loud woman, a woman who possibly might be aggressive, because I'm highly expressive of my boundary lines. I'm very expressive about what I will accept and what I won't accept. And if I work in a certain space, I understand why I'm there. And I think sometimes we have to get back to basics. Why are we there? What are our values? And I think if somebody challenges our values and you feel it's from the wrong place, I think as a society we need to vocalise it. I think we do need to, as a society, develop conflict management more successfully, especially in workspaces. And I don't think we allocate enough time and energy to understand conflict management, because very often bullying comes from a lack of management of conflict. So if we were, as a society, to develop that skill set and also understand that you have to develop conflict management between people with power and people who don't have power. There's a particular skill set, how someone not in power manages someone in power when there's conflict. I think as a society and our work experience would be so much better. So it's something that I'm trying to manage, but there's nowhere to go to manage, to learn these skills. So yeah, for me, it's being true to who you are, understanding why you're in that space. So if you're there to help others, focus on helping others. Don't get caught up in the drama of dealing with power struggles. And also remind the person, if they are, focused on power struggle, why are you there? I don't need to struggle with you. We need to fight to deal with problems which affect the community. I don't need to deal with you. This is a pointless fight. And that's really my tips, really.
Oh my goodness! I'm nodding at everything that you're saying, because you are so right. We need you on the show again. We need to talk about this. You need to write the cause on the conflict, and you're right. It's the conflict of how do you resolve conflict between someone with power and someone without. That's so important. And there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. Yeah. I think for me it will be role model. Role model. Always remember that other people will see how you're behaving, and they might well copy that. So just make sure you're being who you want to see. From Anita, from Jude, and myself. Have a healthy week.